Hannah Brown.
Chris McLeish. Here we
Hello.
are, episode number 12.
12, what a magic number.
I don't think I've got anything to do with 12.
I mean, I don't really buy eggs, but if I did, I'd buy a box of 12.
I mean, fair enough. Probably the best deal. But, yeah. 12.
Also, was
12 weeks of
2012 not...
this.
2012 was one of the years where the world was going to end, was it not?
It was. The minds predicted that it was 2012, but...
Well, here we are. Joke's on you.
Yeah. Well, we survived that. 2012 was an okay year, from what I remember. We had the Olympics, which was a fun time.
I have never seen a sport on TV, including the Olympics.
That's quite a claim, because generally when the Olympics are on, that's all that's on.
Yeah, I just don't watch TV. That's the
Fair.
solution.
That would explain it.
Yeah. It's a true fact. I recently spoke about it with someone, and it's kind of my go-to never have I ever.
I mean, that's quite a good one. That's quite a claim.
I normally just say never have I ever seen football, which is also true. But I actually, when I think about it, it extends to all sport. I have never watched a sport.
Yeah, well, I'm with you on the never have I ever seen I don't think I've ever watched a football match, either on TV or in person.
No, I also, if it comes on, say I was to stop a program and the football would come up, I would immediately mute it, because the sound of people cheering at a football match induces quite a high level of anxiety within myself. So I immediately mute it. The sound of like
fair.
lads really brings something really nasty out in me. I don't know what it is. My hackles get raised.
No, it can be quite an intimidating noise when in the wrong context, I can say.
Even in the right context, I'm not here for it.
Back when work was a thing, I think it must have been Boxing Day in 2019 or near New Year. Either way, there was an Old Firm match at Ibrox, right? Mm-hmm. And I was on the bus on the way into work. And I have to say, but that was back when you didn't have to have social distancing, of course. So there was like me and a few other people, and then we got further down the road, and then eventually football people started to like pile on the closer we got, like the closer the bus got to Ibrox, and I was like, I don't like it. I don't mind buses, right? But see, when you're on a bus and every seat is filled, and then people eventually have to stand up like the middle sort of like way of the bus, I just don't like it. And it was very stressful. And then they started singing songs, and I was like, all I want to do is get to my work. And then the man sitting next to me said I had a very nice smile.
It was that. Little did he know that it was a grimace.
Exactly. And I was just like, oh, that's very nice. And then, because I took the compliment to begin with, I was like, that's very kind of you to say. And he's like, he made the stupid mistake of going, oh, you should smile more. And I was like,
unacceptable.
Oh, mate.
Unacceptable.
Oh, you had to go and ruin it.
Smiling is something people should do as and when they please.
Do you find, particularly in like our work context, that it gets to the point where you struggle to smile?
Well, I'm one of these annoying people who has a smile on my face most of the time. But
you
it's
are
just
a cheery person, that's true.
I try to be as cheery as possible. And when I see other people falling into a place where they feel they can't smile, that's when the smiles amp up. So I'm not sure. I don't know if that ever happens at work to me. Maybe there's maybe been a few occasions where I've had a fallout with someone at work, and that's a point where I struggle to smile.
That's fair.
But I'm also very good at just directing it to the people who need it directed towards them. Yeah. I can be quite cold if I need to be. There are some people at work who have suffered the wrath of me. Not wrath. I don't get angry. But like the coldness. I will, if someone is a nasty person, they will experience chills down their spine as if someone is walking over their grave, which, to be fair, is not. It's not far from the truth.
Well, I'd like to say I feel very lucky that I have never experienced the cold shoulder of Chris McLeish, but I can imagine that being quite an unnerving phenomenon, considering you are always so approachable and hi, how are you, that I can see that being quite scary. That's a good tactic to have up your sleeve.
Thank you very much. It's not very aggressive because I'm not very good at aggressive. So it's just a way of people knowing that I'm not happy. And I'm better than I used to be. I'm now quite vocal. If I'm unhappy about something, I will just be like, that's not good. And then people... Yeah. I like seeing people squirm a little bit, actually, to be honest.
That's definitely the psychopathic corner of you that we don't talk
there
about.
Is a little bit. Yeah, there's just a small corner. Anywho, how's your week been?
Do you know what? I was thinking about... I'm not even joking. I was thinking about this earlier because I realised it's one of the questions we always ask. And one week... I will be able to turn around and go, guess what? Something really exciting happened this week. It's not this week, though.
Well, speak for yourself. I purchased a new Hoover. Oh, yes.
Oh, now, are we talking like high-end Hoover?
I mean, yes. It's a shark.
Okay.
Have you ever experienced a shark Hoover?
I've never experienced one, but I have seen them on the TV.
£150 off. So saved myself a small fortune. I definitely couldn't afford it, but my other Hoover was just completely packed in. So I decided, why not just get a brand spanking new one? And let me tell you, it's got anti-hair tangling. That's what I need. It's got settings for hardwood floors, which is what my flat is mostly comprised of. It's fantastic and barely makes a peep. It's got headlights. It's great. I love it. I'm obsessed.
I've never seen anything more wholesome than you getting really excited about your new Hoover.
It's great. I love it.
Now, the big question, though, does it freak out the cats?
Not in the slightest. They could not give less of a toss. Yeah, they are. The cats, I Hoover a lot. So I thought when I first got them as kittens, I was like, expose them to Hoovers as soon as possible. So yes. I wasn't afraid of just popping the Hoover out on multiple times a day. And then they got very used to it very, very quickly, and now they don't care. They're also, I think they might be a little bit deaf because they will fully stay asleep while I am listening to music full pelt, screaming my head off. And they'll just sleep the whole time. They're quite good at sleeping through quite a racket.
Right. Would you like to hear a funny story?
Absolutely.
Talking about sleeping through a racket. So yesterday, because it was the first day in about 2 weeks where there wasn't either black ice or snow outside, I thought, I'll go for a run. Because it's my current goal at the minute to get rid of the stone that I put on over lockdown last year. So I've been doing veganuary, which has been great. I've been really enjoying it. Good. And I've been trying to do more exercise. So I went for a run yesterday morning. Came back to the house and the front door was locked to my house. Now, my parents were away to a funeral and I knew that and that was fine. But my younger brother slept through me ringing the house phone consistently, phoning his phone and FaceTiming his iPad. And I rattled at the door, chapped on the windows and was like pinging the letterbox. Nope.
Oh, God.
Didn't wake up at all.
Well, that's quite impressive.
It is quite impressive, but it was stressful as well. 45 minutes I sat on the front doorstep.
45 minutes. That's not good. Well, similar story. I was once dog sitting while I lived at my old flat.
Yes.
Which wasn't allowed pets, but don't tell anyone. But I had this dog for a week over New Year a couple of years ago. And I lived with my friend Yvonne at the time. And she had gone home to Paisley for a couple of days. And I, over this New Year, just as the dog came to stay with me for a week, got some kind of really horrible bug. And I ended up being off work, ill with it. I was a very, very fevery. When I get ill, I don't tend to get like a standard cold. Well, no, I do. I do get standard colds, but I tend to get quite viral. So it tends to be kind of viral bugs that I seem to be susceptible to. And so I get very, very hot, very dizzy, very shaky. And so I took this dog for a walk, and it was the most stressful walk of my entire life because I thought I was going to faint every step of the way. And then discovered I had gone for this walk was long. I was away for about maybe 50 minutes or an hour. and on my way back to the flat registered that I had locked myself out the flat because in my delirious state didn't pick up my keys. And so I then had to phone Yvonne, who luckily I had my phone on me. I phoned Yvonne, said that I was locked out, but I thought I'll walk round to the letting agent anyway. So I walked miles to the letting agent, tried to see if they were open. They were not, so I couldn't get a spare key. So Yvonne did have to come out. She had to leave Paisley earlier than she meant to come and rescue me. And I felt so bad, but this is what happens. But that's really all. This Hoover is really the newest thing in my life.
Yeah, I don't think... Although I feel like it's also got to the point that every day just kind of bleeds into the next one. So in terms of what I did the week previous, I'm like, slept and ate.
Okay. Do we have a question for this week?
We do have a question for this week. Shall I dip into the hat?
Dip on in.
Dip on in.
Let us just reiterate, if you have any question ideas, fire them at us, even just in a comment on the Instagrammies, because we're running
Yes, please
low.
do. Okay, you ready for this one, Chris?
Am I ever ready?
Well, I think you might have a couple of answers to this one.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. Chris McLeish, what's the most ridiculous way you've ever injured yourself?
Okay, let's be serious. I am quite clumsy. So
Oh, God.
I once fractured my arm by opening my back door.
Sorry, that's not funny, but it's so ridiculous.
When I was 8 years old, I think, I was playing in the back garden and I went to push the back door open and I didn't quite push the handle down far enough and then pushed against my arm and then didn't feel great. Something felt a bit off. Went to the toilet and when I was turning the tap, it started to hurt my arm. And it wasn't until a couple of days later, I think it was, or it was the next day, I'd stayed off school because my arm was sore, but it didn't seem like anything was drastically wrong. Mm-hmm. But yeah, went to the hospital, turned out, fractured my arm. That's
quite impressive in a strange kind of way.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just very clumsy. I mean, I'm not clumsy. I've fallen over and split my head open once, I think. I was on a boat when I was 2 years old. I fell on a barbecue when I was 2 years old as well. And burnt my hand. Or like I put my hand on a barbecue. I might have put my hand on it and didn't fall on it, but put my hand on a barbecue. What else have I
Chris,
done?
I don't want to dob you in it, but the monkey bars story is possibly my favourite story of all time of yours.
Is that the dislocating shoulders one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that wasn't monkey bars. That was this fun. It was in Tain, which is up north in Scotland, and it was two poles that were kind of like either side.
Oh, okay.
And you were on a little podium, and you had to swing yourself over from one podium to the next. And my cousins and my sister all absolutely smashed it. And then I was the last one there, and I was like, "It's me! I am my 6-year-old." Or I don't know how old I was, but I was young. I must have been about 11, maybe. And so I went to do it, but my arms were too short. And so immediately I went, flunk, and my shoulders got pulled in a really odd, strange way. And it really hurt my shoulders. But God. I probably finished the story when I told you this before in the same way that I'll do now, which is that was the first day I ever watched Moulin Rouge.
I don't know why that's such an excellent end to the story.
I remember I went for a shower to ease my shoulder pain. Oh. And then Mum came to the door and she's like, "We're just about to pop a movie on. Do you want to come and watch it?" And it was Moulin Rouge.
Which is an excellent film.
One of my favourites.
Very good film. Very, very good film.
Fun fact about Moulin Rouge.
Go for it.
Come What May was the only really original song in that film. Everything else was mostly jukeboxy. And they wanted to get it nominated for an Oscar, but they couldn't because it hadn't been written for Moulin Rouge. It was written for a different film.
Oh.
And so they couldn't get nominated for Best Original Song because it was technically not original. It was written for a different film.
That is very cool. Who knew?
Who knew? Also, in rehearsals for Moulin Rouge, they learned a load of dances, like ballroom dances, loads of tangos, things like that. And then they never got used.
That's very cool. It's a very good film. I do enjoy that film. I've not watched that in a long time, actually.
I love it. It's another one I watch relatively regularly.
Yeah, it is a very, very good one.
Yeah.
It's a very good one.
What about you, injury-wise? What have you done injuries?
So, like you, I am quite a clumsy human. I think it's something to do with the height thing.
I've always said, if a tall person were to faint, they'll cause more injury to themselves than a short person because of the momentum that we build up as we fall.
Yep.
So we live day to day a very high risk life.
It's true, and also like our feet are bigger than the average person. I trip over my feet constantly.
Highly relatable content.
Yep, I trip over my feet constantly. I always drop things just because there's extra of you, so there's just more to try and negotiate.
Yeah, I concur wholly. And I also, Matt and I were doing a workout video the other day, and there was a thing where you had to swing your arms round in a circle, like a full straight arm round your body. And it was taking me longer to get my arms round than it did for him and the person in the video because my arms are so much longer than theirs. I was like, this is unfair. I couldn't do it to time with the music because my arms took so long to get round.
This is why it always annoys me on Strictly, right? When one of the celebrities who's maybe of taller than average height does a jive and they're like, oh yeah, your like retraction of your leg should have been like sharper, and you're like, the person's 6 foot, there's more bones and, and muscles to try and pull back quicker.
Literally science. There's more to be moved.
Exactly. But anyway, one of the most ridiculous ways I've ever injured myself, I wasn't actually that tall because I was only 4 at the time, and it was the eve of my cousin's wedding.
Oh no.
So it was my mum's nephew, and my mother was also heavily pregnant with my younger brother at the time. She was about a week away from giving birth to him. And the night before, and we weren't like, they didn't have like a wedding party per se, like all the people like, but we were kind of like included, like, because we were like immediate family. And like the photos and some photos and stuff. And the night before, my mum was putting on a face mask in the living room, and Hannah, being an idiot, decided, I'm going to climb on the coffee table and see what she's doing in the mirror, because for whatever reason I thought this would be a good idea. Climbed up on the coffee table and then suddenly was on the floor. And couldn't remember how I ended up on the floor. And then after a while, I remember lying on the couch, and I remember picking up my wrist, and it was like limp. And that sort of started, there's a big massive lump on it as well. So I ended up having to go down to A&E. And of course, we sat there for like 4 hours or something, and didn't get back until really late. And then, so in all of these wedding photos, I'm standing there with a big white stookie on my arm because I fractured my wrist.
That's so sad.
Oh, it's so stupid. I did fracture my collarbone as well because I fell off a swing.
Oh, that's a sore one.
It is a sore one. Do you know what? Everyone kept saying you tried to jump off because it was at a friend's house. And they said, you tried to jump off the swing? And I was like, but I didn't. I think I just fell off it. But that was a nasty one because there's nothing they can do. So they just whacked my arm in a sling. Like, they were basically like, take Calpol if it's sore. It gets sore. And and I still do have a weakness in that side of my body. It's very strange.
Yeah, well, there was another injury I had.
This is I'm glad I pulled this question out.
So I was rehearsing A Midsummer Night's Dream, and somebody needed a sword, but we didn't have the sword to rehearse with yet. So they just used this long stick. It was like a hard wooden pole. Don't know why that was in the room, but anyway. But he put it to the side when he wasn't using it. And then the opening of the show was a big dance. and we were dancing about. We're just supposed to be acting like we were on drugs.
Great.
And I stood on the pole and it slipped from under me and my ankle twisted.
Oh.
And literally you heard like a little like it sounded, there was a horrible noise. And I had torn the 2 ligaments in my ankle.
Oh.
And it had frayed. That's how they described it.
Oh my
it had
God.
frayed the ligaments in my ankle. So I had to get taken to hospital. They took me in, they paid for a taxi. Also, this was while I was at college studying acting.
Yeah.
They didn't have ice in the building. I got first aid and they didn't have ice or ice packs.
Not good.
Not good. Then I got taken
good.
to hospital in a taxi. They were like, just leave your stuff with your friends and they'll give it to you later. Put me in the taxi, dropped me off at hospital, finished at the hospital. Was there a way of me getting back anywhere? No. Did I have my stuff with me?
God.
No. So we were going to see a show this day at the Usher Hall. This story is so boring. So I had to walk from the hospital, which is in the West End of Edinburgh, to the Usher Hall. No, it wasn't. It was the Lyceum. And somebody from my college drove past me and waved, even though they were in my class and knew that I had been in hospital. And I had to walk. It was probably about 2.5 miles. I had to walk to the theatre. And it took me a good hour and a half, 2 hours to walk because my ankle was killing me. And I ended up having to go to hospital again the next day because we suspected that I had broken something. So I had to get checked again because the pain and the swelling was so bad.
Yeah.
Oh, it was very dramatic.
That's all from slipping on a piece of wood.
Yeah. Oh, I've just remembered another one. I just remembered another story.
You need to tell us. This is great content here.
So I was in Panto one year and I was playing a character called Ladder, who was supposed to be the tall, clumsy one. Please.
Well.
And there's a part where we had shaving foam and paint brushes, and there was 4 people that kept getting paint on each other, and it was very slapstick panto fun. And I got smacked in the face by a paintbrush and my nose started to bleed. And I was on stage, so to cover the fact my nose was bleeding, I got some of the shaving foam and shoved it up my nostril. And that's how I stopped myself from bleeding. And the next day, the director was like, Chris, I've got a note for you. In the slapstick scene, you seemed very distracted. You were not concentrating at all. And I was like, no kidding. My nose was bleeding everywhere. How was I meant to concentrate? I was paranoid people were going to see it. Anyway, that's the last
directors.
of my stories. Classic directors.
Oh,
Anyways.
God. Oh, that's a good one. I'm a fan of the paintbrush one.
Thank you. Well, shall we get down to business? Because we both have quite lengthy stories this week. I think you're first this week.
I think I am first this week.
Excellent.
So this might be a bit of a long one, but if I speak fast enough, it won't be. So
We're here for
I
it.
thought I'd do a little bit about a place in Glasgow that was that was built in the late 18th century and closed in 1955, and then it was pulled down. But there are lots of stories round about it, and I thought it would be quite dark stories, so I thought it'd be quite a good one to do.
I'm here for it.
This week. Great. So this week I am doing Tales from Duke Street Prison and the Haunting of Cathedral House Hotel.
Lovely. I don't know any of this.
Oh, fantastic. That's what we like to hear. We are here to educate, are we not? So, Duke Street Prison in Glasgow received its first inmates in 1798. The prison was one of the early examples of the separate system, quote unquote, which was a form of prison management that was based on the principle of keeping prisoners in solitary confinement. And the objective was that prisoners would repent or go through their penance by basically sitting silently, not talking to anybody and just thinking on their crimes. Okay. And apparently this was which sounds really basic to us, but at the time this was the most incredible thought, that was the best theory when it came to dealing with how we re-educate criminals, is to not do whatever they did, to not do it again. Fun fact for you. The prison does not appear on the old Ordnance Survey maps of 1895. There's a blank space where the prison should be. So these were maps that basically that were done like basically to show streets, like cities. And on the ones of Glasgow, there is just a blank space where the prison at the time was. But this is because no prisons or military installations were shown on these maps.
Oh.
The military ones I can understand, prisons not so much. But hey, they thought we'll keep it a secret that's there. And I should feel like Duke Street is like it's like going into the east end of Glasgow, I think. And it's kind of Duke Street Prison was across the road from the necropolis, basically.
Oh, cool.
So it's that end of town for anybody that knows Glasgow. The construction of the prison and its running were considered state-of-the-art for the time, but rising population numbers throughout the Victorian era led to an inadvertent increase in the crimes committed, because obviously there was more people, therefore there was more opportunity for crimes to occur. In the Statistical Account of Scotland in 1845, it records a set of new buildings constructed within the prison, which opened on the 25th of December 1824.
Merry Christmas to you.
Lovely wee Christmas presents for all those new prisoners. Also recorded are the prisoner numbers of 1834 in the statistical account, and there was a total of 2,323 interned at the prison throughout that year. So it's quite a lot of people. It was a lot of people. It was also a mixed gender prison. So they held both women and men, but in separate wings.
How progressive.
How progressive for the mid-19th century. Not having libraries is posing a real issue at the minute when it comes to research. Mm-hmm. So I was doing there's always these old wives' tales of how horrendous the conditions were at Duke Street Prison, right? And every single article or blog post or anything that I found online, all it would state was the conditions were terrible, but wouldn't elaborate on why.
Okay.
So this is something I was always told in uni, is don't just make a point, expand on it. So I was literally shouting at my laptop going, but what was the reason for the conditions? It was very annoying. But it's at times like this a library would come in handy. It's kind of common knowledge, like throughout history, that living conditions were really, really poor and that there were major issues. It became not fit for purpose. So in 1882, Barlinnie was opened and all of the male prisoners from Duke Street were transferred over, leaving it essentially a mainly female prison, or that's what it was used in its later years. Mm-hmm. Basically, there was a handful of cells still for men, but largely it was used to house female prisoners. Some of those held at the prison included suffragettes.
Oh. I know some of the treatment of suffragettes during the...
Yes.
Yeah.
I found the kind of stories of two Scottish suffragettes that were held at Duke Street Prison. Yeah. So Ethel Muirhead and Dorothea Chalmers Smith were arrested on the 24th of July 1913 for attempting to set fire to an unoccupied house at 6 Park Gardens, Glasgow.
Fantastic.
So I'm pretty sure that's the big posh houses that are over in the West End.
Wouldn't be surprised. You're not going to set fire to a tenement.
Well, that's very true. Yeah. Chalmers Smith had actually graduated in medicine from the University of Glasgow in 1894.
Good guy.
So she was a doctor. And her husband didn't care for her activity with the movement. Mm-hmm. Classic. Believing that a woman's place was in the house.
Oh, shove off.
Correct answer. Oh, it's so irritating, honestly. Muirhead had been active with the movement since 1910, and she is reported as or one of the things that she did that's kind of like reported in her story is that she apparently threw an egg at Winston Churchill when he visited Dundee.
I probably would have done the same.
I mean, who wouldn't? Who wouldn't? There's quite a few people I'd like to throw eggs at now.
What?
Let's be honest. So when they were detained, both women actually went on hunger strike upon arrival at Duke Street, and Moorhead was reportedly the first suffragette in Scotland to have been force-fed whilst in prison. Yeah, it's really harrowing. I find the suffragette movement super fascinating.
Yeah.
And I love reading about it. Don't necessarily agree with all of the tactics that they deployed. Especially, I can understand they were trying to make their point, but blowing stuff up is never a good move. But
no,
despite that, I find it just really interesting and just good on those women, because we might be sitting in a very different world if they hadn't decided to do something about it.
This is true.
It's very true. In 19...
Sorry, I was just going to say really quickly, there's a very, very good documentary about suffragettes, which is Suffragettes with Lucy Worsley.
Is that the one Joanne's in?
The one that Joanne's in. It was very good.
Yeah, it was very good.
And she played Mary Lee.
Yeah. In 1913, both women were released from the prison under the Prisoners' Temporary Discharge for Ill Health Act 1913, but it's perhaps better known as the Cat and Mouse Act. Have you ever heard of this?
I don't know that I have.
That's all right. I didn't either until yesterday. After force feeding was no longer used to combat the continuing spates of hunger strikes, this act was put in place. Suffragettes on hunger strike would be released when becoming exceptionally weak from the effects of not eating. They would be given time to recover back home, after which the women would then be recalled to continue their sentence once they were well. So you can see what... yeah. Although not all suffragettes would return to the prison, instead adopting various means to avoid reinternment. So it was basically an act that you left prison, got well again, and then you'd go back to serve the rest of your sentence, and that time out of prison wouldn't count towards your sentence, if you get what I mean. It'd be like a pausing. But the suffragettes had a whole network to effectively hide these women that had been let out and just not go back. It's so interesting. It's so cool.
I would like to know more about any men that got involved in supporting the suffragette movement.
That's very true, actually. That's
it's
a very
something
good
I
point.
don't know about. I've only ever really listened to or looked into the women that were involved in the suffragette movement, but I wonder...
That's a very good point.
I wonder if there were men that did help, but maybe don't get spoken about because it's not about men. It's a movement about women.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
That's very true. It's a very good question. I'm going to have to look that up now.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Another Scottish suffragette, Helen Crawford Anderson, a suffragette and one of the rent strike organisers, who the rent strikes are perhaps one of the most famous people involved with the rent strikes is a lady called Mary Barber. And it was basically, I hope I get this right, during the First World War, all the landlords put up the rents because all the men were away and thought they could screw over all the women. And the women were like, I think not. And basically took it upon themselves to protest it. So effectively, it never mess with a Glaswegian woman. Just saying.
Yeah, I can attest
Just
to that.
Don't do it.
No.
Yeah, so Anderson was imprisoned at Duke Street in the March of 1914 after breaking 2 windows of the Army recruiting office in the Gallowgate in protest against the arrest of Emmeline Pankhurst. She too was released under the Cat and Mouse Act, recovered and then recalled to the prison, only to be released after going on hunger strike a second time. So they effectively used this act to their advantage because they knew that they were going to get back out again, and there wasn't a particularly good system in place to get them back into the prisons. So they adopted this quite extreme means of staying out of it, but it worked for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever does the job.
There you go. Yeah. And both Moorhead and Chalmers Smith received medals. Duke Street Prison did become kind of associated with political activists that were kept there. Did you know that 12 executions by hanging were carried out at Duke Street Prison? 11 were men and 1 was a woman. This woman would actually be the last one to be executed in Scotland. Oh. Did you know? So this is the story of Susan Newell and the go-kart tragedy. I promised you a murder this week, so I've got you a murder.
Thank you so much. I chipped my front tooth on a dodgem.
What?
When I don't know how old I was.
God.
It was my adult teeth, but this front tooth there has a tiny little artificial bit because I chipped it. I chipped
Fun
it on
facts with Chris.
Yeah. Smashed my face on the steering wheel of a dodgem.
How fat? At what speed were you going for you to do that?
Well, someone hit me from behind, and I was very small, so I went, and then it was a really hard steering wheel. So.
Oh, McLeish.
Just to
honestly,
keep the theme of
you're a liability.
Injuries. I know.
So, on the 20th of June, 1923, paperboy John Johnston, that's so hard to say, was out selling his papers and was last seen heading towards the flat in Newland Street in Coatbridge, which is just outside of Glasgow, which Newell shared with husband John and daughter Janet. It is believed that there was friction between the couple at the time, as John had lost his job in December of 1922 and had been unemployed for 6 months by this point, and both of them had began to drink heavily. Not good. It is reported in 1923, John reported Susan to the police for assaulting him. This particularly nasty exchange left him bloodied and bruised. The police did not take the case any further, however, and he ultimately decided to leave Susan. He was Susan's second husband, so her daughter was his stepdaughter.
Okay.
At 6:45 p.m. on the 20th of June, John Johnston arrived at Newell's flat. Susan took a paper from the boy, but did not give him payment for it. An argument rose between the pair, which culminated in Susan strangling the 13-year-old to death. That's
Susan!
It's not. That's horrible.
Unacceptable.
It's a horrible murder. It's awful.
What a shame.
Oh, it's really not. See, reading about it, because there's some really good, in-depth, recordings and of what happened at the trial and everything that goes more in depth than what I'm going to do today. It's a pretty brutal, dark case that I'd never heard about, but it's pretty, it's not great. Janet, who was 8, roughly, at the time, returned home that evening after playing with friends, only to find John's newspapers strewn across the floor and his body lying on the couch. This is a child.
Oh, that's such
going
a shame.
home to find this boy lying in her house. It's awful. Susan actually made her daughter help roll the body in a rug.
This Susan, I mean, I know what her fate is because you've already told me, but...
well, yes, exactly. You know where this is going. It's not good. She was a child. She was a literal child. The next morning, just before 8, Newell and her daughter were witnessed pulling a child's go-kart. It's appearing heavy and covered in clothing. They were then witnessed at 9:30 a.m. Delivery driver Thomas Dixon saw the pair, and Newell asked him if he could give them a lift into Glasgow as they were looking for digs. He agreed, driving them to Duke Street, but it was during the unloading of the cart did it almost tip over. John Johnston's head and left foot protruded from the quilt on top of him, but Newell managed to fix it just before the driver could see what was under this pile of clothes. It's also reported that Janet, her daughter, was seen sitting on top of this pile on this go-kart. This is a nasty, nasty case.
That's so sad.
It's super dark. So she managed to fix it and continued on. However, the incident with them getting out the truck had actually been witnessed by a local resident, and she ultimately decided to follow both Newell and her daughter. Coincidentally, this resident met her sister in the street, asking her to aid in her following of Newell. The latter turned into an access lane, I think between like two flats. One of the women alerted a resident, Robert Foote, reportedly saying to him, "There is a woman away up that entry and she is carrying a dead body." Not what you want to hear at 9:30 on a morning.
Absolutely
not what you want to hear. Newell, however, by this point was quite literally cornered in this alleyway. A 6-foot wall her only means of escape, as both Robert Foote and Police Constable Thomas McGennett descended upon her. Allegedly, she had made it halfway over the wall before being pulled down by McGennett and placed under arrest. So she was effectively just going to abandon the poor boy and her daughter and just try and make a run for it.
This woman's a piece of work.
She really is, by the sounds of it. So Newell initially blamed her husband for the murder, and he too was arrested, but he claimed a special defensive alibi. However, it was actually Janet Newell, her daughter, that turned out to be the star witness in the trial.
Good girl.
As she told the story of seeing Johnson's body in the flat, that she helped her mother wrap the body, and that Susan constantly reminded her to tell the police, if they were caught, that John murdered the boy. So effectively, she was trying to make her daughter
lie.
Yeah, basically to play along. But she didn't.
Good gal.
John's alibi, well done, Janet. John's alibi was also secure and he was freed also. So it's just Susan left at this point. A plea of insanity was given by Susan's defence counsel, but it was denied. The jury only took 37 minutes to find her guilty.
Not a surprise.
Not a surprise. Susan was executed on the 10th of October 1923 at Duke Street Prison. This is pretty macabre, this next bit, but here we are. Just before her execution, she was reported to have pulled the hood from her head, threw it at the executioner, saying, "Don't put that thing over me." This is just before she drops.
Good God.
There is actually still no concrete motive given for Newell's crime, even to this day. It's debated whether she had a temporary loss of sanity when she committed the murder, or whether it was something as simple as her simply losing her temper. Because, as you can imagine, the prosecution had an excellent case in terms of portraying her as both like violent and short-tempered because of the assault on her husband that had been seen by police. So they had seen the damage and that she was drinking heavily, etc. But yeah, it's a really interesting case, but it's a really dark one. It's really horrible.
I mean,
it's not good.
It's not a surprise to me that police, even back then, didn't really take male domestic abuse seriously.
Yeah, it's very true.
It's a shame for everyone apart from Blinking Susan. She sounds like a bit of a bum.
Yeah, she sounds like a right piece of work. It's quite scary. And do you know what I read as well, which is really bizarre? The person that, I can't remember his name, but the person that executed her was something like, was it chief executioner in Scotland at the time? And not long after Newell's execution, he actually committed suicide himself.
Really?
Yeah. It's a really bizarre story. So Duke Street Prison was closed in 1955 and it was ultimately demolished in 1958 to make way for a housing estate. Because what didn't? What didn't Glasgow?
True.
The only remaining structure of Duke Street Prison is in fact one of the boundary walls, which you can actually still see. If you go over to that neck of the woods in the city, you can still see the wall. That's the only bit of it that's left.
Well, see, I think I must have mentioned this in a story, because I think you've said that. I've said something about Duke Street Prison, and then I think you said that. I'm sure you told me that.
We're going to have to go back and listen to all of the episodes now.
Yeah, I'll leave that to you.
Just to figure out which one it was. A fun fact for you, though. There are actually visible bullet holes in the portion of the boundary wall that's left.
Oh, is that firing squad?
No.
Okay.
It's not.
That's good. That's good to know.
That's good. Because otherwise that means they would have been executing people in broad daylight, which isn't great.
Don't want that.
No, we don't want that. No, so it actually occurred during a shootout between the police and the IRA in May 1921.
Okay.
So this was when an IRA commander was being driven to the prison from one of the city courts, and there was people there basically trying to free him while he was in transit to Duke Street, and a police officer actually died in the crossfire, which isn't very nice. But if you want a bit of history, go and look for the bullet holes at the Duke Street prison wall.
I actually might, because that's really interesting.
Do it. And it's relatively close-ish to you. Well, not really, but...
Yeah, but not horrifically far.
You're closer to the city centre than I am.
Yeah.
But what does this have to do with Cathedral House Hotel, I hear you ask? So, the building that is now the Cathedral House Hotel was constructed in 1877, where it was used as a halfway house, which was basically a hostel where released inmates would go once freed from Duke Street Prison. It's believed that this link with the notorious institution has led to its various reports of hauntings. Now, this building crops up. See, if you Google like haunted places in Glasgow or Scotland or whatever, this building pops up a lot.
Okay.
In terms of the reported ghostly activity that goes on. And
it's
it is believed... It's a build. What? Sorry.
It's a building that still exists.
It is a building that still exists.
Okay.
It's also just across the road from the necropolis.
Nice.
It looks. I highly recommend everyone looks it up because it looks like a very nice hotel. It's a little boutique hotel now. Yeah, you should. But yeah, it's sort of notorious for stories of these hauntings, and I think it's because there's lots of stories about what happened and. Not necessarily proven stories, but there's just lots of stories and lots of myths. And it wasn't necessarily a happy place if you've got all these women being released from prison, and it was basically where they went before they got let back out into the world. And if living conditions were as cramped and crowded and unsanitary as recorded in Duke Street, they're not going to be particularly happy people coming back out into the world. So I think I can imagine a lot of upset and suffering being associated with this building.
I'm sure rehabilitation wasn't a high priority on the Victorian age.
I doubt that. I doubt that very much.
No.
So one of the ghost stories that's associated with the building is that a woman released from the prison was reunited with her children at the hotel. The woman, apparently distraught and fearful that her children would be taken away from her again, decided that if she couldn't have them, no one would.
No.
The story goes is that she drowned both of her children in a bathtub in one of the upper floors of the building. The spirits of these children have been reportedly heard laughing and playing in the upper floors, as their footsteps are often heard in the upstairs corridors and bedrooms. Again, it's this ghost child thing that I always go on about. But if they're happy, that's all that matters.
Yeah.
If they're having a good time and they're finding a bit of entertainment, that's all that matters. Another reported ghost is of a young boy that apparently is present on the main staircase of the property, and is known for touching people who walk up and down the stairs. He has also reportedly been seen running through the downstairs area of the hotel and disappearing through a wall.
That's quite the magic trick.
It is quite a good magic trick. Can you imagine sitting there drinking your beer and you see a child running through a wall? It's not something you see every day.
And funnily enough, the only reason I can't believe that is because I wouldn't be drinking a beer.
That's very
The child doesn't bother me. I'd be like, cool stuff. But the fact that I'd be like, why have I got a beer? That's what would be going on.
That's very true. You make a very valid point. Poltergeist activity is said to be frequent throughout the hotel, with light anomalies, moving furniture and disembodied voices all having been reported. And as I said, the hotel is situated across the road from the Glasgow necropolis, which is a major Victorian cemetery in the city where approximately 50,000 individuals are believed to have been buried. But that is Tales from Duke Street Prison and The Haunting of Cathedral House Hotel.
Lovely. That had it all. We had murder. We had ghosts. We had suffragettes. That's something I didn't expect today.
Thank you. I aim to please.
Yeah, thoroughly enjoyed.
But I was saying when I was talking about this earlier, I was saying we should definitely do a wee lunch at Cathedral House Hotel once we can, when that's allowed again, because their menu looks fantastic.
Oh, does it?
And yeah, it looks like it. Look it up. Everybody look it up. Looks like a good menu. But it looks very nice. And also we get to hang out with ghosties for
I would excuse myself to go to the toilet, and then 5 hours later you'd be like, where has Chris gone? He's up in the top floor having a bath, trying to contact the children. That's...
Oh, God.
Or sitting on the stairs, rolling a ball in the hope that the ball comes back. That's what I'd be up to.
Yeah. They'd come over with the bill and be like, where's the person you were eating with? And I was like, upstairs hanging out with the ghosts.
That's exactly what would happen.
Where else would he be?
I just want to make friends with everyone.
That's
including
fair enough,
ghosts.
And I'm sure they appreciate it.
This is it. Not enough people pay them any attention.
Exactly. And they probably like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just thought this week I'd do a little bit about a non-existent place in Glasgow now that has lots of notorious stories surrounding it, some of which are quite dark.
But the fact there's still a bit of wall, I would thoroughly poke those bullet holes and just get transported to the 1800s.
Great.
Okay, so let's just fire in, shall we?
Let's go for it.
So I am going to give you the scoop on a Scottish-Canadian serial killer from the 1800s.
We all love one of them.
So this one's cheating because he is Scottish, but he does a lot of his business abroad. But he's Scottish nonetheless.
We'll accept it.
He is believed to have started the habit of killing in the US, potentially also killing in Canada, but most of his known victims were in the UK. So he does come back to us. This is the story of the Lambeth poisoner, Thomas Neill Cream.
Ooh, that is an unfortunate name.
Very unfortunate name. Cream's story kicks off when he was born on the 27th of May, 1850 in Glasgow.
There we go.
At age 4, he and his family moved out to Quebec in Canada, where he later studied medicine at the McGill University of Montreal. He graduated in his 20s, completed a thesis... He graduated in his 20s, completed a thesis on chloroform, and it is believed that he claimed at one point $350 from insurance after setting fire to his lodgings.
Intentionally?
Yes.
Oh.
So he's a troublemaker.
Oh.
Also, note, a thesis on chloroform. Where's the need?
Yeah, exactly. I don't think you really need a 100,000 word paper on what it does. Everybody knows what it does.
Yeah. In 1876, Thomas, I'm going to call him Thomas from here on out because the cream name gives me the bulk.
Because we are 5-year-olds as well.
5-year-olds. Yes.
So we'll just laugh.
We will just laugh. In 1876, Thomas married Flora Brooks. He was supposedly coerced at gunpoint by her dad after he got her pregnant. Thomas soon after nearly killed his wife by aborting the baby. And sadly, although she did survive the abortion, she died a year later. It's reported to have been due to consumption, but speculation as to whether he played a role in the death has long gone on. So there is a chance he was involved, but we're not too sure.
Okay.
Thomas then came back over from Canada to London. He continued his studies at St. Thomas's Hospital Medical School and became qualified as a physician and surgeon.
Lovely.
Before then returning to Canada, Ontario, to London. There's a London in Canada. Wild.
Oh.
Yeah, so Canada's London, Ontario. It was around about this time in 1878 that he started an affair with Kate Gardner. She became pregnant and was unfortunately found dead in a shed behind Thomas's office, having been poisoned by chloroform in 1879.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. When Mr. Creamy was questioned by authorities, he was adamant he knew of her pregnancy only because she had come to him to abort the baby. And he claimed that the dad was a businessman. But when he said no to aborting the baby, she took her own life. Aye, right.
Huh.
I highly doubt that chloroform is a means that someone would take. Well, maybe actually, I don't know.
I'm pretty sure like cyanide and arsenic were more readily available than chloroform was.
That's true. That is true. Because they were used to treat all sorts of things.
Also, the fact he's already got previous with the last girl, just one. It sounds a bit dodgy.
Yeah,
we'll
keep
see.
your eyes out. Keep your eye on Thomas Cream.
Yeah.
So without wasting any time at all, Thomas relocated to the windy city of Chicago in the US, where he set up his own medical practice at number 424 West Madison Street, where he gave sex workers illegal abortions. It was here that he became acquainted with a black nurse named Hattie McKay. Now, the fact that her race is mentioned is not something I could find any relevance for. It came up in a couple of articles that I read. Once we've gone through this next bit, I'll say why I think perhaps it's mentioned. Don't know, but I've kept it in there anyway. She was married, had 3 children, and lived up the road. Below Hattie was the Green family, and in the garret was Miss Ellen Hackle. And I looked up what a garret is. It's the inhabitable space in the attic. So if somebody lives in the kind of the attic-y kind of space, it's called a garret. Didn't know that.
Oh.
There you are. Green and Hackle knew that McKay had for some weeks previously taken on board with her a mysterious somebody in the shape of a pretty and ladylike and quite delicate-looking young white woman. That was a quote. It was also noted that Dr. Thomas Neill Cream visited her 3 times a day and soon became suspicious of their activities. It is noted that Thomas always carried suspicious-looking parcels whenever he visited. And according to the Chicago Tribune, and I quote, "Towards 4 o'clock on Friday morning, an unusual noise on Mrs. McKay's floor aroused Mr. Green, who, arising, saw Mrs. McKay leave the house, together with her children. In the afternoon, he went upon the 2nd floor, but found the door to the rooms locked. A horrible stench soon afterwards began to pervade the rooms, and Mr. Green reported the occurrence to Lieutenant Steele of the West Lake Street substation, who broke in the door to Mrs. McKay's rooms, where the decomposing remains of the mysterious boarder were found lying upon a bed, and presented a sight which, combined with the odour, beat the officers back and forced them to rush for the open air. A search of the premises revealed the fact that the unfortunate woman's name was Mary Ann Matilda Faulkner, and that she came originally from Ottawa, the capital of the Dominion of Canada." Let's unpack slightly. We have the nurse who's got a boarder. The boarder is called, let's call her Miss Faulkner, and she has been found dead, and Mr. Thomas Cream has been seen at the premises on numerous occasions. Steele obtained a description of Thomas from the neighbours and arrested him a short time after at White Brothers drugstore. A note was also discovered left at the druggist's. The druggists! I assume that's just another word for pharmacists, but this article used druggists a lot. I like it.
It's a good word.
Yeah. So the note was discovered left at the druggist's from McKay to Thomas Cream.
Okay.
She informed him that Faulkner was dead and that she was leaving. Unfortunately for McKay, before she could make good on her escape, she was arrested and locked up in a cell near her alleged partner, which is Mr. Cream. Why do I keep calling him Mr. Cream? I already said I was going to call him Thomas. When interrogated, McKay claimed she knew Thomas because he had performed an abortion on her. She was indebted to him by the sum of $15, and to pay him back, she accepted Miss Faulkner as a lodger. She also stated that Faulkner had been left by her husband and needed to get rid of the child so as not to be inhibited when earning a living. Thomas had been contacted because of the referral to him as a well-known abortionist. McKay claimed that on Thursday, the 12th of August, 1880, Thomas brought a collection of instruments to her house for the operation. All that she could hear of the operation was Faulkner's moans. Her condition after the operation got worse overnight, and by the next morning she had passed away.
Ugh.
Thomas Neill Cream's recollection of events was vastly different, of course. He claimed that McKay had asked him to aid a sick woman, but upon his arrival found Faulkner in terrible shape and also the dead body of a 3-month-old fetus. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It does make sense.
He claimed that McKay had committed the abortion herself and had done so with a catheter and bent wires, one of which perforated the wound. So that was what was making Miss Faulkner very sick. In addition, Thomas maintained that his records for what he prescribed for Miss Faulkner were appropriate and that the chemist would stand by him and support his claims. Mm-hmm. However, the authorities found several problems in prosecuting Thomas for the death of Miss Faulkner. For example, newspapers reported it was unclear whether an abortion had actually been performed or not, although medical authorities did report that Faulkner was undoubtedly pregnant. McKay's and Thomas's stories also widely differed, and therefore it seemed impossible to figure out who was telling the truth. There was also a lack of solid evidence against him. Once again, he was free of any blame. For now.
Oh.
No word of what happened to Hattie McKay. So this is where I'm going to hypothesize as to why the race was so important. Mm-hmm. I don't know if maybe it's seen as odd that this man would be associating himself in the 1800s in America with a black woman.
Yeah.
I don't know if perhaps it's because it's mentioned a lot because she might have been looked at more seriously as the person who did it because she was a black woman.
Maybe,
I'm not too sure. Nobody ever expanded on why saying that she was black was so important. I don't know that it is important, but I also do think that perhaps the fact that she was a black woman may be why it's impossible to find any record of what happened to her as to or whether she was sent to prison. There's nothing. I couldn't find a thing.
That is also you make a very valid point.
I like to think that that's not the case. I like to think that she was also let away and she could just return to her children. But I don't know. There's nothing. Couldn't find anything in Google. Let's move on, shall we? In December of 1880, suspicion surrounded him regarding a patient named Miss Ellen Stack. She died after she ingested strychnine in what she thought were birth control pills. The pills were supposedly manufactured by Thomas, but nonetheless, he was never charged, even though he attempted to blackmail the pharmacist who filled the prescription.
You'd think at this point the authorities would maybe go, we might take your medical license away from you now.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to be doing a particularly good job. And he's only ever mentioned in terms of illegal abortions. I don't know how successful his medical practice was.
Yeah.
Not as an illegal abortionist.
You'd think maybe third time's the charm. They'd go, you're looking a wee bit dodgy now, mate. How about...
Yeah.
For now, you just stop being a doctor.
Also, your name's Mr. Cream. Like,
It's the worst thing
Get
about
that
it.
changed. Get that changed. There's a cream for that. Oh. There, I knew there would be a good joke in his name somewhere.
Oh, God.
You're pregnant. There's a cream for that.
Oh, God. That's
Anywho.
awful.
Terrible. In 1881, headlines were filled with the news of Daniel Stott's death in Illinois. He was married to Julia Stott. She was described as a 35 years of age, very delicate looking, and very plain spoken. Stott died of strychnine poisoning on the 14th of July, 1881, but the coroner gave another reason for his death. New York Daily News reported, I quote, on June 12th, just 20 minutes after swallowing a dose of Cream's medicine, Daniel Stott suffered a violent fit and fell back dead. The coroner called his passing natural death, and the certificate reads epilepsy. Strange. Julia was reported at the funeral of wearing heavy mourning and wept copiously. That would have been the end of the situation if Thomas Neill Cream had not been having an affair with her and had not implicated himself in her husband's death. Thomas began to send telegrams and letters making accusations that the drugs Stott had taken had been tampered with and that he was poisoned. And then this bit is horrible and I hate it. So to test whether or not the medication was poisoned, they took the remainder of the drugs and gave them to a dog.
Oh, no.
When the dog died, authorities exhumed Stott's body, and that's when he was tested, and it was seen that he had taken enough strychnine to kill 3 out of every 4 men.
And they didn't think to check that initially?
Well, you'd think. Although I think they were like, he died of epilepsy, let's bury the body. And then Thomas started to throw around accusations, and that's the only reason they investigated it, which makes no sense considering the fact that he were the one what did it.
Exactly. Oh, the poor dog.
Poor dog, and Mr. Cream's an idiot. To get out of trouble, he threatened the pharmacist with blackmail, but failed. So he wrote to the coroner blaming the pharmacist for errors. However, it was Thomas that was arrested, as was Julia, but to save herself, she turned against him and blamed the entire fiasco on Thomas. Here comes another quote. "There was something funny about the last prescription," said Julia. "Dr. Cream said to me, 'Don't have this filled at the first drugstore you come to. It must be filled exactly right. Take it down to Buck and Rayner's here in the city, because they will be responsible in case anything should go wrong.'" Fishy, fishy, fishy. Ultimately, when Stott had turned against him, Cream was thus forced to face murder on his own. Exactly how that happened is published here by the Daily Evening Herald. I quote, "Dr. Cream and Mrs. Stott were in love at Belvedere, Illinois, and they concocted a peculiar plan for murdering the woman's husband safely. Stott being ill, the doctor was called in to attend him. A prescription containing a safe amount of strychnine was sent to the druggist, and when the medicine came, a large quantity of poison had been added. It calculated that Stott's death would at once be traced to strychnine, and that its presence in a fatal proportion would be ascribed to a blunder by the druggist. The murderers would probably never have been detected if the woman had not distrusted her partner. When she heard that he himself announced that death was the result of poisoning, she mistakenly inferred that he meant to fix the crimes upon her. Therefore, she hastened to make a statement inculpating him." Again with the 1800s and their weird wording of things.
That was certainly a lot of words.
A lot of words. I hope everyone followed. Julia worked with the prosecution and testified that after her husband's death, their scheme was to have her give Thomas power of attorney, allowing him to sue the drug firm Buck and Rayner for the sum of $10,000, citing improper preparation of the medication. However, he was convicted of murder instead. So, bish bash bosh.
I mean, fair.
Yeah.
He had it coming.
He had it coming. He had it coming. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, and that a day each year was to be served in solitary confinement. However, despite this life sentence, He was released after 10 years.
What? Are you kidding me?
I know. Life means life.
Why did they let him out? Is it because everyone kept laughing at his stupid name?
Let me tell you. Allegations are that his dad bribed politicians with $5,000, and his brother also pleaded for his brother to have leniency. That resulted in his sentence being reduced, and it allowed his unconditional release. So
You're
essentially,
telling me there's a whole family of Creams?
A whole creamy family who used their power and their money to convince people to let him out. Lucky for the world, this man was once again released and could continue his crimes. What a treat.
Aww.
So back he comes to the UK. He moved to London on October 1st, 1891, under the name Thomas Neill. So he's dropped the cream.
He should have done that to begin with, okay, but okay.
The second he was born.
Yeah.
He should have been like, wah, wah, get rid of the cream. Should have done that, so... He took lodgings at 103 Lambeth Place Road in Lambeth, which at the time was a poverty, petty crime and sex work heavy area. Before long, people associated with him began dying again. The first victim in London was 19-year-old Ellen Nellie Donworth, a sex worker who accepted a drink from Thomas. The next day, after having drinks with him, she was severely ill and then died 3 days later from strychnine poisoning. Thomas offered police the name of the murderer for a cash prize of £300,000. He also attempted to blackmail W.F.D. Smith. Do you recognise the name W.F.D. Smith? I didn't, but he was the owner of the W.H. Smith store.
Oh.
Yeah. And for some reason, Thomas accused him of the murder and demanded money to keep silent.
Why not?
Less than a week later, Matilda Clover, another sex worker, suffered a similar fate to the previous victim. Again, Thomas involved himself in this case by writing a note to Dr. William Broadbent. He was a prominent English neurologist who was a leading British authority in the field of cardiology as well as neurology. In the note, Thomas accused Broadbent of poisoning Clover, demanding a huge sum of money to keep quiet. Broadbent, clever man, Broadbent immediately forwarded the note to Scotland Yard, and the note had been signed by someone called Malone.
Right.
That Malone thing doesn't come back, so it's not relevant. But anyway.
Excellent.
Next, we have the attempted poisoning of Louise Lou Harris Harvey. She met him at the Alhambra Theatre, and he told her that she had spots on her forehead and must take some medicine to clear that right on up. He gave her pills, but she found his behaviour so suspicious that she threw them into the Thames.
Well done, her.
Yes. And Reynolds newspaper has a little report. Again, a quote. Loads of quotes this week. What a treat.
I do love a quote.
So this is a quote from Louise Lou Harris. He took 2 pills out of his waistcoat pocket. They were wrapped in tissue paper and were long, rather narrower at one end than the other. It was rather dark, but they seemed to be of a light colour. He asked her to swallow them one by one and not to bite them. He put them into her right hand. She pretended to take them, but passed them into her left hand. He asked her to show her right hand. She showed him that it was empty. He then asked to see her left hand, in which the pills were, and she threw them into the Thames. What a clever gal.
Well done, her.
So she managed to evade disaster. Thomas's next victims were... There's lots of victims this week. I do apologise. Thomas's next victims were 2 sex workers, 21-year-old Alice Marsh and 18-year-old Emma Shrivel. In their flat in 1892, he offered them Guinness to drink and left shortly afterwards. The following morning, a neighbour heard Marsh screaming, and she went to her assistance, found Marsh in great agony, writhing on the floor, and Shrivel then also began to scream. Medical assistance was sought and an emetic given. Soon thereafter, Marsh made a statement to the neighbour about what she had been given and what she had subsequently taken. The poisoned women were taken to St. Thomas's Hospital in excruciating pain. Marsh died en route and Shrivel died after arrival.
Oh.
Rumours of poisonings had Londoners nervous. Mention of the poisonings appeared in the London's Daily News. Again, a quote. The police at Scotland Yard are still pursuing their inquiries into the recent cases of fatal poisoning of women in the neighbourhood of Lambeth, with a view to establishing a connection between the suspected person against whom the police hold a warrant. An experienced inspector of Scotland Yard has the matter in hand, and he is working with the aid of the local police and his own assistants to complete the web of evidence he is constructing in support of the case against the suspect. From the accounts which the police have received from various quarters concerning this individual, there is every reason to believe that the opinion of the detectives is correct, that he is suffering from a peculiar form of mental derangement, which finds exercise in a desire to take away life. There is no other motive attributable to the cruel poisoning of Alice Marsh, Emma Shrivel, and Ellen Donworth. And as the history of the Whitechapel murders shows, the indulgence of this homicidal tendency upon women in a peculiar defenceless position is not singular to the Lambeth poisoner. Now, that's a long quote, and I only really included it because it's interesting that it draws a link to Jack the Ripper, but also speaks about sex workers in not the most horrific way.
I get
Do you know how so many papers historically have always treated and spoken about women who work in the sex worker line of work in quite an unfavourable way, but where they have, I mean, at this point in time, women who were working as sex workers probably didn't have much of a choice, whereas there are people who do work as sex workers as a perfectly viable means of making a living. But at this point, because I was recently watching The Ripper on Netflix, and they were talking about the interesting use. They kept using the word prostitute. And on My Favourite Murder this week.
Very good documentary.
Very good documentary.
Very good.
Very good. It's about the Yorkshire Ripper, if anyone hasn't watched it. Very, very good. And My Favourite Murder, we're talking about that this week, saying that it's interesting that they kept using the word prostitute. And instead of substituting the term sex worker, and it's to do with the position that the women at the time were finding themselves in. It wasn't a career choice. It was a position women who were struggling found themselves in. So therefore, the word prostitute was used because it's interesting. The way that they spoke about it was very, very interesting. And so, but anyway, this article, I found it interesting that they admitted that it was a homicidal tendency upon women in a peculiarly defenseless position. Was quite a nice way of doing it, not making the women seem like degenerates or horrible people because of the position they found themselves in.
Yeah, exactly. Because historically, but also to an extent now, that form of work was seen to be only taken up by an underclass of society. It wasn't a proper quote unquote way, or like a respectful way to make money. But probably particularly after the Jack the Ripper murders, is that these women were street smart, but they were vulnerable.
Yeah, totally.
Because they were perceived as being an underclass, and therefore people could do what they wanted with them because they weren't validated.
Yeah, they
by
were just
writing
like, treated
at
like
the time.
dogs, treated like animals.
Yeah.
So I kind of appreciated that this quote didn't actually really shame the women.
It's almost like there is a concern, like a genuine concern in the way it's written, that somebody is attacking women that perhaps aren't in great positions of power or are more susceptible to people being violent towards them.
Yeah, totally. I like it. I'm a big fan. So I appreciated the...
Well done, whoever wrote that article.
Thank you very much.
Back in 18 whatever.
Thank you. As the investigations continued, Thomas's accusatory letters drew attention to him because the letter writer seemed to know things not widely known by the public. So, although Thomas wasn't signing the letters as himself all the time, so it wasn't easy for him to be the one that they pinpointed, but the letters were drawing attention. Thomas then also met a visiting New York policeman. The policeman had heard of the Lambeth poisoner, and Thomas kindly offered to give him a brief tour of where the various victims lived.
Oh, as one does.
As one does, excuse me. The policeman happened to mention this tour to a British policeman who found the level of detailed knowledge unsettling. Thomas was from thenceforth surveyed... Nope. That's a really strange way to phrase that sentence. Thomas, from that point on, was surveilled, and he was seen to frequent the company of sex workers. Upon contacting US authorities, it was discovered that he had previous convictions in America. So, in 1892, he was arrested, and 10 days later was charged with the death of Clover, Donworth, Marsh, and Shrivel. In addition, he was charged with the attempted murder of Harvey and extortion for the blackmail letters sent that he had written. An inquest was held the following month, during which... So here's a fun name, which I should have looked this up. An inquest was held the following month, during which Athelstan Braxton Hicks, the coroner in London and Surrey, read a letter purported to be from Jack the Ripper. So Braxton Hicks, I want to know if that's the man who maybe came up with the Braxton Hicks contractions business.
I mean, one would think, because it's quite an unusual name.
It's quite specific.
It is quite specific.
Yes, but also, let's not ignore the fact I just said that he received a letter from Jack the Ripper, apparently. This led, I focused on the wrong thing, and then when I got to the end of the sentence, I was like, oh wait, no, there's something far more interesting than Braxton Hicks. The letter declared that Thomas was innocent, which produced peals of laughter from everyone in the courtroom, including Thomas. Ultimately, one way to make yourself look guilty as hell is to laugh when someone says that you're innocent. Ultimately, however, the evidence in the inquest was overwhelming against him, so he was found guilty of all charges and was also found guilty on all counts within those charges. Justice Henry Hawkins then sentenced him to death and ordered him to be hanged. Okay. 15th of November 1892, he was executed at Newgate Prison. Outside the prison, a crowd of around 300 congregated and witnessed the hoisting of the black flag, assuming that's a thing in England when they hang people.
Cool.
This was customary. As was customary, Thomas's body was buried the same day in an unmarked grave within the prison walls. But in 1907, he was removed from the Newgate Prison Cemetery and reburied in the City of London Cemetery and Crematorium, but again in an unmarked grave. Now, here is some little interesting tidbits to accompany the tale. The executioner claimed that Thomas's last words on the scaffold were, "I am Jack the..." And then he was hanged.
Oh my God, talk about bad timing.
Yeah, so first of all, we've got a cliffhanger, but there's not going to be a season 2 because he's been hanged. But these claims are substantiated, as police officials and others who attended the execution made no mention of any such event. Moreover, records show that Thomas was in prison at the same time as the Ripper murders in 1888. So if this was true, it would have been impossible for him to have been Jack the Ripper. Okay. There's also the theory that perhaps the executioner made this claim because he wanted to get credit for being the one who killed Jack the Ripper. Which, fair enough.
Fair.
Ripperologist Donald Bell speculated that Thomas had bribed officials and been let out of prison before his official release. And Sir Edward Marshall Hall suspected that Thomas's prison term had been served by a lookalike in his place. Such notions are extremely unlikely and contradict all known evidence given by the Illinois authorities, newspapers of the time, Thomas's solicitors, Thomas's family, and of course, Thomas himself. But it's interesting nonetheless. The motivation for the series of poisonings has never been settled. It has generally been assumed that Thomas was a sadist who enjoyed the thought of the agonies of his victims, even if he was not there physically to see the agony in person. However, Thomas was also interested in money, as evidenced by his attempts at extortion in almost every single one of his crimes. So it remains possible that he committed the murders under the pretense of ill-planned attempts to profit from them. From the start of the series of crimes, Thomas wrote blackmail notes to prominent people, and the poisoning of his one known male victim, Daniel Stott, was committed with the hope of getting the wealthy widow's share in the deceased's estate. Make sense?
Yes, it makes sense.
Yeah. In addition to the 5 poisonings, in addition to the 5 poisonings Thomas was convicted for, he is also suspected in the murder of his wife, Flora Brooks, in 1877, and at least 4 other women who died in his care while undergoing abortions. And that is, yeah, I know, that's quite a lot of people. But that is the long and quote-heavy story of Thomas, middle name Cream. I've forgotten his middle name.
Neil.
Neil. It was Neil. Yes. Thomas Neill. Yes, so there you are.
He was just a bad man, wasn't
Bad
he?
man. As always, please subscribe to us, download us, rate us, give us comments on Apple Podcasts, that kind of thing, because it really does make a difference to how much we can get seen by other people and will pop up in people's feeds.
Was that Gothic?
If people are able to do that for us, so we would thoroughly appreciate it. Pop on over to the Instagram for the relevant photographies, and yes, that's all I have to say.